Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into the absolutely incredible journey of how a child's mind develops. We're going to look at how their thinking shifts and changes, and how we've tried to measure that amazing thing we call intelligence. So let's just jump right in with a question that has fascinated parents and psychologists for, well, forever. How does a kid's thinking just suddenly click? One minute they see the world in a very specific way, and the next, it's like a whole new level of understanding has been unlocked. Well, right around age 7, something really remarkable starts to happen. The legendary psychologist Jean Piaget had a name for it, the concrete operational stage. This is the moment where logical, organized thought really begins, and it completely changes the game for how a child sees and interacts with their world. To really get this, think about that classic water glass experiment. If you show a younger kid two different shaped glasses with the same amount of water, they will almost always point to the tall, skinny one and say it has more. Why? Because their brain is locked on to just one thing, the height. But then, you show an older kid, one who's in that concrete operational stage, and they see right through it. They're able to de-center their thinking. They get it. They understand that, yeah, the glass is taller, but it's also thinner, so it all balances out. This grasp of conservation, it is a huge, huge developmental leap. So this new way of thinking is like they've been given a brand new mental toolkit. Inside, there are 4 key tools. First, you've got reversibility, the idea that you can freeze water into ice and then melt it right back again. Then there's seriation, being able to line up sticks from shortest to longest without a problem. You also get classification for sorting objects, and transitivity. That's pure logic. If A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, then A has to be bigger than C. Okay, so if kids are getting so much better at thinking logically, what exactly is this intelligence that's growing? I mean, is it just one thing, or is it way more complicated than that? This is a debate that's been raging in psychology for over a century. The old school view was that intelligence was this single general factor. They called it G, almost like a master key that could unlock any mental door. But a lot of newer theories say, no way. They suggest it's much more like a toolkit, filled with all sorts of different specialized talents. For instance, the psychologist Robert Sternberg came up with his triarchic theory. He said there are really 3 main types of intelligence. You've got analytical intelligence, that's your classic book smarts. Then there's creative intelligence, the ability to come up with new ideas. And finally, practical intelligence, which is basically street smarts. And then Howard Gardner took this idea and ran with it, proposing an even broader view with his theory of multiple intelligences. He identified all these different domains. Sure, you've got the ones we always think of, like word smarts and number smarts, but he also included things like bodily kinesthetic, think of amazing athletes or dancers, and interpersonal intelligence, which is all about being people smart. So we've talked about the software, these new ways of thinking, but what's happening on a physical level? Well, while all this is going on, the brain's actual hardware is getting a massive upgrade during these school years. There are 2 really important processes making this happen. First, increased myelination is basically adding insulation to the brain's wiring, letting signals travel way, way faster. At the same time, synaptic pruning is like a cleanup crew getting rid of old, unused connections. The result of all this? A brain that's just faster and much more efficient. And this souped-up hardware allows for the development of something called metacognition. It literally means thinking about your own thinking. It's like the brain gets its own manager, one that can look at a problem, figure out what skills you have, and pick the best strategy to tackle it. This is an absolute game changer for learning. So, with all these new ideas floating around about what intelligence even is, it was only a matter of time before someone tried to capture it, to boil this incredibly complex thing down to a single number. And this, of course, led to the birth of the intelligence test. The story really starts in 1905, in France. Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon created a test, but here's the thing, their goal wasn't to label kids, it was actually to find the ones who needed extra help in school. But then, Louis Terman at Stanford University brought the test to America, adapted it, and created the now famous Stanford Binet test. A little later in 1939, David Wechsler developed a new kind of test that looked at both verbal and nonverbal skills, and that became the foundation for the Whisk and Waze tests that are still widely used today. The original formula for this intelligence quotient, or IQ, was actually pretty straightforward. It just compared a person's mental age, so the age they were thinking at, to their actual chronological age, and then multiplied it by 100. So if you had a 10-year-old who was performing like an average 12-year-old, their IQ would be 120. Simple, right? Well, as you can probably imagine, trying to reduce the entire vast, beautiful complexity of a human mind to just one number, well, it created a whole lot of problems. The history of IQ testing is just full of controversy. And one of the biggest puzzles for scientists is something called the Flynn effect. This is the wild observation that for decades, average IQ scores have been going up and up and up by about 3 points every decade, all over the world. So what's going on? Are we actually getting smarter? Or is it just that we have better nutrition? Or maybe we're just better at taking tests? The jury's still out. And this brings us to a huge criticism: cultural bias. I mean, what's considered smart is not the same everywhere. Some cultures value speed and quick answers. Others value taking your time and being thoughtful. Most of these tests were designed with one very specific Western idea of intelligence in mind. And that's a serious problem. So the test scores are all standardized on a bell curve, just like this one. You can see that most people, about 68%, fall right there in the average range. But it's what happens on the outer edges of this curve that really matters. This is where labels get assigned. Scores above 130 might get you the gifted label, while scores below 70 could lead to a diagnosis of an intellectual disability. And those labels can follow a kid for their entire life. So when you boil it all down, here's the thing. IQ testing is a tool. And like any powerful tool, it has huge potential benefits, but also some really serious potential harms. On one hand, it can be a lifesaver for identifying kids who need support or helping people get benefits. But on the other, it can lead to harmful labels, isolate children, and reinforce those cultural biases we talked about. And all of this leaves us with one final, really big thought. Now that we understand so much more about the developing mind, from how a child's logic just clicks into place to all the different ways a person can be smart, how should we, in our own lives, our schools, and our society, define and encourage intelligence? Because in a world that's way more complex than any test can measure, what truly matters?